My name is Marshall, and this is Waveform. What does it take to design a really powerful and unique explosion sound? Well, nowadays you can find fully designed explosion sounds like this one on just about any sound retailer's website. For people just starting out with sound design or for indie developers, this is a pretty great thing. It allows you to put more time and focus on things that matter more to your particular project, like getting the game to feel right, fixing bugs, or maybe just learning how to use audio software. But accessibility does have its downsides. When taking a shortcut in audio, you run the risk of sameness. So in this video, I thought we'd spend some time dissecting how to make an explosion sound from scratch, and do our part to combat sameness in the sound design world. Because even if you've never done sound design before, I promise that you can make some incredible sounds with just the objects lying around your house and your microphone and your cell phone. After all, interest in sound design has been increasing every year. Wait, what the f? Alright, scratch that, new mission. Just get more people into game audio, I guess, because it's fun. I don't know. I think I know some people who might be able to help out with that, actually.
I'm Mark Petty. I'm the audio director.
Josh Davidson, senior sound designer.
I'm Jesse Lemons. I'm the audio manager now.
I'm Brian Fieser, lead senior sound designer.
The audio team at Gearbox Software are no strangers to fun, unique sound design. So before we make our own explosions, I wanted to ask them a few questions, like what sounds inspire them and how they think about explosion design. And for some of them, influences go way back.
And I actually reference Star Fox. Whenever I played Star Fox as a kid, those big boss battles at the very end of the levels had some pretty awesome, badass explosions. And at the end of the day, the fidelity had nothing to do with it. I kind of ask why that is. I think it has a lot to do with the explosions are highly choreographed. There's like just these small flickering explosions that occur. It's a little pop, 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 and then there's that last big bang.
It also depends on what you are trying to make the player feel. If we just took straight library pulls, all of our games would end up sounding the same, right? So part of our job there is like, yeah, we can use these libraries and build layers on top of them, but it's our job to manipulate them in a way that fits the game direction, the game style.
I will say that I think that from a learning standpoint, when it comes to something like an explosion, having the recorder is definitely the way to go. Look beyond just the physicality of the sound and what that end presentation is, and understand everything that it takes to potentially make up a sound and go outside of the boundaries of it's an explosion. You know what I mean? Doing your own vocalization and then distorting that and pitching it, coming up with creative ways to find elements to add character to what you don't have exposure to, which is to go out and record explosions.
I like to kind of go through the library or a synth patch or something and see what can I get out of this. And one of the things I enjoy about doing that and having that approach of kind of diving in first is, like Brian said, happy accidents. Like I'll end up with something and maybe it's not the sound that I want for that particular explosion or something, but I'll go, well, that still sounds cool. I'm going to save that off as something else. I'll come back to that. That might be good for some other layer someplace else. Finding things that I wouldn't expect. Maybe I put a baby cry into this explosion or something as a layer, that kind of stuff, and kind of get away from this is the sound, make this sound kind of mentality.
After our interview, they set a team challenge to record and design some explosion sounds from scratch as well. Take a listen to what they came up with. You have three main components: the transient, the body, and the tail. And while every explosion is different, whether you're making a futuristic plasma core shatter or a realistic tank shell impact, you'll always need to find a way to balance those three elements together in a satisfying way, both in their volume level and in the order in which they play. Satisfying is a word you hear very often thrown around when talking about weapons or combat in games, and I've always thought that it had more to do with cadence than anything else. Let me show you what I mean by cadence. If we were making a gunshot with these three sounds, transient, body, tail, I could play them at the same time, which to my ears sounds a little bit too poppy and busy, or I could stagger them each by about 30 milliseconds. That version sounds infinitely better to me. Even though we're only just slightly adjusting the times that the layers play, it gives more room to each element and generally makes for a sound that feels right in addition to sounding right. Finding out what cadence and what order feels right for our sound is going to be important if we want something satisfying. Okay, so let's make our elements. We're going to be using exclusively the mic on my iPhone to capture all of our source material. And this time, instead of recording our elements specifically for each layer like we usually do, I'm just going to record whatever I find in my room and then decide what to do with it later. This is often the best approach when making something like an explosion because half the time you'll find that if you overplan your recording session, when you start designing, nothing works as planned and things sound much better if you just abandon your original ideas and use everything not as it was intended. So these are the sounds that we'll be cooking with today. Alright, so let's make our transient first. So for the transient, I grabbed a short popping sound from hitting the plastic tub with my knuckles, and I also pitched up 4 different cardboard rips to make sharp hissing sounds like this. Then I also layered in a slightly more resonant sound from the plastic tub, and added it back into the mix, all while setting the sound to some saturation to glue all these new elements together. And with that, we made a nice transient for our explosion. It may sound like absolute garbage to you, but when we get this sound layered in with the body and the tail of our explosion, the harsh, shrill characteristics that you hear now in isolation will sit back in the sound and simulate that slight pain that you would experience hearing an explosion like that in real life. I'll show you what I mean later. For the body of our sound, I used all the recordings layered together at drastically different pitches. Take a listen. It doesn't matter quite as much what sounds we use for this as what effects we put on those sounds, because with effects like distortion, you lose so much of the original characteristics of your sound that all your source material starts to sound very similar. For my main effect chain, I used a saturator, some distortion, and finally a multiband compressor. The saturator is there to add beef and some gravelly textures to the low end of our recordings. The distortion then adds back some of the higher frequencies that we were missing. The best way to explain these effects is just to show you what my voice sounds like with saturation on it, and show you what it sounds like with distortion. Hear the difference? Here's what the entire body layer came out sounding like. Alright, now let's make the tail. This presents a unique problem because we didn't record anything low-pitched or rumbly, and pitching things down drastically leads to what's known as artifacting. When you have a high-pitched sound and you try to lower it, immediately the quality of the recording is reduced because the same amount of playback information now has to last much longer than it did before. This is what artifacting generally sounds like. We don't want our explosion tail to sound like that, so the way I got around it was to pitch our knife recording down as low as I was comfortable with going, and then remove almost all of the high frequencies with an equalizer. Then I sent that very low rumble sound to a distortion and a reverb to attempt to replenish the frequencies that I was removing with my EQ. Once I had done that, I added some echo and additional compression to the sound to glue it back together. This is what the tail sounds like now. Okay, now that we have all of our layers sounding cool on their own, it's time to bring them back together with a cadence that feels right. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when first getting into layering or doing sound design is not giving each element enough time to breathe in your mix. Creating and layering sounds is not just about what sounds you use, it's also about when they play, how it feels moving from one element to the other, and how much of the tail in each element to let ring out. I want to first introduce the transient, followed shortly thereafter by the body layer, and then the tail after that. With that cadence, here's what our final explosion sounded like. Now I have a challenge for you guys. Go get your cell phone, record some audio with it, and design your own explosion using only those sounds. When you're done, upload the audio file to either SoundCloud or YouTube, and tweet the link to me with the hashtag GoRecord. I and the audio team at Gearbox Software will take a listen and pick our favorite sound to win. The winner will get access to the sample library that I've been making since this show began, and a shout out on Twitter so everyone can hear their sound design. So get out there and go record. Thank you so much to the dedicated patrons again who support this show. You guys are absolutely the best. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.